Something weird is happening with truck drivers in America, and most people have no idea. The federal government just yanked $73 million from New York, and not because of some massive scandal, not because of corruption at the highest level, but because of a computer default setting at the DMV. Let me explain. Commercial driver's licenses aren't like your regular driver's license. These are credentials that allow someone to operate an 80,000-pound vehicle down the highway. The standards for getting one are supposed to be uniform across the entire country. Federal law sets the rules. States administer the tests and issue the licenses. Except it hasn't been working that way. And the cracks have been showing for a long time. Federal law is very clear. When a foreign national gets a CDL, that license cannot expire beyond their legal authorization to work in this country. If your visa expires in 6 months, your CDL expires in 6 months. Simple. Here's what New York was actually doing. When a foreign national applied for a CDL, the state's DMV automatically issued them an 8-year license. Didn't matter if their work authorization expired in 60 days, didn't matter if it expired next month. The system ignored it and handed them a credential until 2032. Federal auditors pulled 200 random records. 107 of them were illegal.
We audited New York in 53% of the licenses, commercial driver's licenses issued to foreigners. 53% were issued illegally, contrary to our rules. And so usually we give states 30 days to come into compliance. We gave New York 4 months to say, hey, what we want you to do is just go back and audit all of these licenses that you've given. And if you've given them contrary to the rules, we'll revoke that license.
And New York has over 32,000 of these licenses active on the road today. Auditors also found cases where licenses were issued on basis that documents had already expired at the time of issuance, meaning some of these drivers didn't even have valid status when the license was printed. The federal government gave New York a chance to fix it.
Usually we give states 30 days to come into compliance. We gave New York 4 months.
New York refused.
And in essence, New York said, go pound sand, DOT.
So FMCSA withheld $73.5 million in highway funding, and now a 30-day clock is ticking.
And so this is the first step. We said, okay, we're going to pull the $73 million. There's more money that we can pull as we get to the out months.
But here's what makes this so much bigger than New York. This exact story already played out in California. The feds forced California to revoke 17,000 licenses and pulled $160 million in funding.
Duffy writing, quote, "It's reckoning day for Gavin Newsom in California. Our demands were simple. Follow the rules. Revoke the unlawfully issued licenses to dangerous foreign drivers and fix the system so this never happens again."
And before that, North Carolina failed 54% of its audited records. Then Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Washington, and Colorado. The audits keep happening. The states keep failing. At this point, we're not talking about isolated instances. We're talking about a pattern across the entire country. And here's the question no one is really asking. How did this go on for so long without anyone catching it? That answer is uncomfortable. The audit mechanism that was supposed to catch these failures simply wasn't being used aggressively enough. For decades, nobody was really even looking. And the states, whether through negligence or indifference, never corrected the programming errors that were producing non-compliant licenses by the thousands. But that changed in 2025 when the Trump administration launched a nationwide audit campaign. And what they found has neither been shocking or completely predictable, depending on how closely you've been paying attention. If you're finding this useful, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and hit the like button. It helps keep this channel covering the stories that most people aren't paying attention to and helps get it into the algorithm of other freight individuals who are looking for the same kind of content. Okay, I want to walk you through what the real world consequences of this actually look like. There's a case where a driver holding a New York non-domiciled CDL picked up a load. Documents showed a temporary visa stamp that had expired in February of 2023. The CDL was valid until March of 2026. 3 years where this driver held a commercial credential with no valid work authorization. A temporary visitor visa typically doesn't authorize someone to work in the first place. The load was still picked up, and the driver was never seen again, and neither was the freight. That's not a regulatory abstraction. That's a shipper who lost their freight and almost has no legal recourse. So what ends up happening if New York keeps refusing to comply. The federal government has what people in the space are calling the nuclear option, similarly to what the option is for California, full decertification.
But in the very end, if New York doesn't comply, we can pull their ability to issue commercial driver's licenses.
And like we talked about in our California video, under federal law, the FMCSA can prohibit New York from performing any CDL transactions whatsoever. No new licenses, no renewals, no transfers, no upgrades for every CDL in the state, not just the non-domiciled ones, every single one. This impacts every single CDL holder in New York. New York has somewhere between 300 and 400,000 holders. The port complex at New York and New Jersey is one of the most busy on the East Coast, and the distribution networks that feed all of New England run through that state. Long Island's food supply, fuel delivery into the 5 boroughs, and all of it runs on New York licensed commercial drivers. Under full decertification, other states aren't legally required to recognize New York's CDLs anymore. Enforcement agencies at weigh stations could start rejecting them. And then the entire Northeast freight corridor gets caught in the crossfire. And the liability exposure for carriers operating in this environment right now is something fleet owners need to take very seriously. If you're dispatching drivers on licenses that were issued in violation with federal requirements, you carry that legal exposure even if you didn't know. If one of those drivers is involved in a serious crash, whether their credentialed status is legally uncertain, your position in that lawsuit just became a lot more complicated. Now, here's the bigger structural question. How do we build a system where this was even possible? Where a state DMV could program its computers to ignore a federal requirement and face essentially no real-time consequence until an audit finally surfaced? Some people are starting to ask whether the fix is a more federalized system where the federal government has a hard verification checkpoint to clear any CDL before it can be printed. No federal clearance, no license. The DMV programming error that caused all of this would physically be impossible under that model. Now, whether that actually happens is a political fight that will probably take years. But here's what isn't a political question anymore. The audits keep happening, and the states keep failing. And the consequences keep landing on people who had nothing to do with it. The fleet's doing everything right. The domestic drivers whose credentials are suddenly in a legal gray area, and the shippers who lost freight due to drivers who never should have had a license in the first place. New York has 30 days. If they keep calling this a political stunt instead of fixing it, the nuclear option is likely next. And if that happens, the shelves, the fuel, the freight that keeps moving across the Northeast gets caught in the middle of a fight because of a DMV computer that was never programmed correctly. A system built on the assumption that everyone was following the rules, and a reality where almost no one was checking. They're checking now. Thank you for watching.